The Roman Empire commanded the seas with a simple wooden blade. This is the story of the ship's rudder, the unseen invention that steered an ancient superpower. By the end, you will understand exactly how a piece of carved timber became a cornerstone of imperial might. We will investigate why this crucial technology vanished from history for centuries, only to re-emerge. We will also examine a stunning luxury barge that rewrote everything experts thought they knew. What does the journey of a single piece of technology tell us about the rise and fall of a civilization? This simple wooden blade did not appear overnight. Its story begins far earlier with a much more basic tool. To understand the Roman breakthrough, we must first look at what came before it. For thousands of years, across the ancient Mediterranean, sailors steered their ships with something called a steering oar. Picture the great ships of the Egyptians on the Nile, or the Phoenician traders crossing the open sea. These vessels were often guided by a single massive oar, not at the back of the ship, but mounted on the side near the stern. It was essentially a giant paddle. A crew member, or sometimes two, would wrestle with this huge lever, fighting against the water to change the ship's direction. It was a system born of necessity, but it came with severe and obvious limits. First was the sheer physical demand. Maneuvering a heavy wooden beam through resistant water required tremendous strength and endurance, a constant battle of muscle against the sea. Second, and more critically, was control. In calm waters, a skilled helmsman could manage, but when the waves grew rough or the wind picked up, the steering oar became almost useless. It could not provide the precise, firm control needed for complex maneuvers in a storm or during a naval battle. The force of the water would simply slam the oar back against the ship's side. This was the technological ceiling for the brilliant seafarers of Greece and Phoenicia. For their purposes, it was often enough, but for a new power with grander ambitions, a power that needed to move vast armies, secure endless supply lines, and dominate every coastline it touched, this primordial paddle was a bottleneck. Rome's vision for the Mediterranean demanded something better, something stronger, something that could turn the sea from a barrier into a true Roman road. The empire's growing reach created a pressure that would soon crack the old way of steering wide open. This pressure for a better solution did not emerge in a vacuum. Rome's first steps onto the water were taken by standing on the shoulders of older, wiser sailors. Before the legions, there were the Etruscans, a sophisticated civilization to the north, who were masters of the Tyrrhenian Sea. They were traders and pirates in equal measure, and from them early Rome absorbed crucial nautical knowledge. But the real giants of the sea were the Greeks and the Carthaginians. When Rome began to build a navy, it did not invent from scratch. It looked at the best designs already winning battles and moving cargo, and it copied them. This borrowing gave Rome a powerful, immediate fleet, but it also locked them into an old way of thinking about control. Consider the two workhorses of the young republic. For war, there was the quinquereme, a massive wooden beast powered by rows of oarsmen. Its name means five, referring to the arrangement of its rowers. This was a ship built for one purpose, to close with an enemy and smash into them. And for trade, there was the corbita, the humble merchant vessel. It was rounder and slower, relying on a single square sail, its hull swollen with grain, olive oil, or wine from across the empire. Despite their wildly different shapes and purposes, both of these ships shared the same ancient steering technology. Look at the stern of a Roman warship or a merchant cog from this era, and you would not see a single central rudder. Instead, you would see two. Mounted on either side of the ship's stern, like a pair of giant fins, were two massive quarter rudders. Each was a heavy, curved wooden blade, controlled by a long tiller bar that required several strong men to operate. This was the standard, the baseline. It was an improvement over a single steering oar, offering a bit more leverage and control. But it was fundamentally the same principle, a system of paddles fighting the water. The helmsman did not truly command the ship. He negotiated with it, using brute force to suggest a direction. In a calm sea, it was manageable, but this two-paddle system was clumsy, mechanically inefficient, and vulnerable. In the chaos of a naval battle, a well-aimed enemy ram could easily snap one of these vital blades, leaving the ship crippled and spinning. For a growing empire whose lifeblood flowed across the waves, this was a glaring weakness built into the very backbone of every ship. The Roman mind, however, was not content with borrowed limitations. A problem had been clearly identified, and a solution was quietly taking shape in the most unexpected of places. The answer lies not in a single grand invention, but in a slow, almost invisible drift. Across the empire, in shipyards from Ostia to Alexandria, a quiet revolution was taking place, one ship at a time. The evidence for this shift is fragmentary, a puzzle pieced together from stone carvings, faded mosaics, and the rare preserved wreck. If you examine Roman art from the 1st century onward, you begin to see subtle changes. Reliefs on monuments and detailed floor mosaics in wealthy villas sometimes show ships where the steering oars are no longer mounted far out on the sides. They have been drawn in, closer to the curve of the stern itself. This is the migration, the steering oar beginning its long journey from the ship's flank to its very spine. The engineering reason for this move is profound in its simplicity. Mounting a single steering blade directly on the centerline of the sternpost, the main backbone of the ship's rear, changed everything about control. Think of it like a door. A side-mounted steering oar was like trying to open a heavy door by pushing near the hinge, a struggle requiring immense force. But a centerline rudder mounted at the stern was like pushing that same door right at the handle, far from the hinge. The leverage was dramatically better. A single helmsman could now exert more turning force with less effort. This central position also sliced through the water more cleanly, reducing drag and making the ship slightly faster and more efficient. Suddenly, one strong arm could do the work that once required 2 or 3. But why would the Romans, masters of pragmatic tradition, abandon the twin-quarter rudder system that had served the Mediterranean for a millennium? The catalysts were likely as practical as the solution itself. As the empire grew, so did its ships. Grain freighters from Egypt needed to be larger and more stable to carry the tons of wheat that fed the city of Rome. A single stout centerline rudder was stronger and less prone to damage in open ocean swells than 2 vulnerable side paddles. For the Navy, the endless cat and mouse games of piracy and patrol demanded new agility. A warship that could turn more sharply and predictably held a deadly advantage. The old twin rudders were a conversation with the sea. The new centerline blade was the beginning of a command. Yet this was not yet the rudder as we know it. It was a transitional form, a steering oar that had found a better home. The true transformative leap, the moment it stopped being an oar and became something entirely new, was still to come, born from a challenge no one could have predicted. That quiet revolution needed proof, and it came from the most unlikely of places, not the open sea, but a small volcanic lake in the hills near Rome. In the 1930s, under the orders of Mussolini's government, engineers undertook the monumental task of draining Lake Nemi. Their goal was to recover 2 legendary ships, enormous pleasure barges built for the infamous Emperor Caligula in the 1st century. What they pulled from the mud was not just a pair of rotting hulls. It was a perfectly preserved wooden time capsule. These were not warships or merchant vessels. They were floating palaces, complete with marble floors, heated baths, and intricate plumbing. And at their sterns, archaeologists found something that stunned them: the most sophisticated and complete Roman steering systems ever discovered. The Nemi ships had proper centerline mounted rudders. Each one was a masterpiece of ancient engineering. The rudder blade itself was massive, carved from a single, durable oak timber. But the real genius was in the hardware. The Romans had fitted these rudders with heavy, cast bronze brackets. These metal sleeves acted as both pivot points and reinforcements, holding the rudder firmly against the sternpost, while allowing it to swing smoothly from side to side. This was the crucial pivot, the invention that transformed a steering oar into a true rudder. The force from the helmsman was transferred through a long wooden tiller bar that slotted into the top of the rudder stock, the vertical post. This entire assembly, wood braced with bronze, created a lever system of incredible efficiency. One man could now control a vessel nearly the length of a football field. The Nemi ships were the ultimate proof of concept. They demonstrated that Roman shipwrights possessed not just the woodworking skill, but a deep understanding of pivot mechanics, leverage, and hydrodynamic force. They had solved the engineering puzzle. Yet this revelation only deepens the central mystery. Here was a brilliant, proven technology, recovered from a lake in the 1930s, displayed for the world to see. And then, less than a decade later, it was gone again, not lost to history this time, but to the flames of a world war. The Nemi ships, and their priceless rudders, were tragically destroyed by a fire during the fighting in 1944. Their physical evidence was erased, leaving behind only photographs and measurements. This loss makes the next question even more urgent. If this technology was so advanced, so clearly effective, why did it seemingly vanish from use for centuries after Rome's fall? The answer lies not in the rudder itself, but in what it was attached to. The genius of the Nemi rudders lay not just in their design, but in their physical construction. To build a blade capable of withstanding the relentless force of the sea, Roman shipwrights became master wood selectors. Their primary choice was oak, a timber prized for its incredible density and interlocking grain. This wasn't just any wood. It was a material that combined immense strength with a natural flexibility, allowing it to absorb the shock of crashing waves without splintering. Imagine the trunk of a centuries-old oak tree, felled in the forests of Italy or Gaul. The shipwrights would seek out a specific, straight-grained section, often from the heartwood, to carve the central stock, the vertical spine of the rudder. For the wider blade itself, they might laminate or carefully join several planks together, always aligning the wood grain to follow the flow of water, reducing drag and preventing cracks from spreading. The construction process was a blend of brute force and delicate precision. Using adzes and draw knives, craftsmen would shape the rough timber into that familiar tapered form, wider at the bottom to catch the water and narrower at the top where it joined the tiller. But a single piece of wood, no matter how strong, was vulnerable to the sea's pressure. The Roman solution was reinforcement. They would often sheath the forward edge of the rudder stock, the part that bore the most stress against the hull, with iron bands. These were heated, hammered into place, and left to cool, shrinking tightly onto the wood like a metal fist. In some cases, the entire blade was built clinker style, with overlapping planks riveted together with iron nails, a technique borrowed from hull construction that created an incredibly resilient, shock-absorbing structure. Perhaps the most critical and easily overlooked step was making this moving part watertight. Where the rudder stock passed through the hull, there was a deadly vulnerability, a hole directly into the ship's belly. A constant jetting leak here could sink a vessel as surely as a storm. Roman ingenuity sealed this breach with simple, brilliant materials. They crafted a leather collar or gasket, soaked in animal fat or pine tar. This pliable ring was packed tightly around the stock where it entered the ship. As the helmsman turned the tiller, the rudder would pivot smoothly within this greased, leather seal, which swelled with seawater to form an ever tighter barrier. In other cases, shipwrights used thick, viscous pitch, a tar-like substance boiled from pine resin, smearing it liberally into the joint. This was ancient caulking, a waterproof glue that flexed with the wood's movement. It was a humble detail, but it was the difference between a ship that sailed and a ship that sank. This marriage of robust oak, iron reinforcement, and a simple leather seal created a tool that was both a mighty lever and a delicate instrument. Yet for all its sophistication, this technology carried within it a hidden fragility, one that would become starkly apparent when the world that built it began to crumble. All that brilliant engineering culminated in a single, worn wooden bar. This was the tiller, the final link between the human mind and the ship's soul. Carved from ash or another resilient wood, it slotted directly into the top of the rudder's vertical stock, transforming that massive underwater blade into an extension of the helmsman's own arms. He was the gubernator, a title that gives us our word governor, and his station was a place of immense responsibility and physical strain. Perched on a small wooden platform at the stern, often sheltered by a simple canopy, he commanded a view of the entire ship and the horizon beyond. His world was one of constant tension, his hands gripping the smooth, polished wood of the tiller, feeling every shudder and shift of the hull transmitted up through the rudder from the water below. This was not a job for mere strength. It was a profession of profound sensitivity. A skilled gubernator learned to read the language of the sea through his palms, interpreting the pressure of a following wave, the sudden slackness of a cross current, or the shuddering grip of a shallow sandbank. In calm conditions, his movements were subtle, small adjustments that kept the ship on its plotted course. But the sea is rarely calm. Imagine the scene during a sudden Mediterranean squall. The ship heels over, waves crash over the deck, and the wind screams in the rigging. Now the tiller is no longer a simple lever. It is a living, thrashing beast. The force of water slamming against the rudder blade could wrench the tiller from an unprepared man's hands, potentially breaking his wrists or hurling him across the deck. To hold course, the helmsman would brace his entire body, legs spread wide for stability, muscles corded with the effort of fighting the sea's raw power. He was not just steering, he was wrestling. In battle, the demands were even more precise and terrifying. A Roman warship's primary tactic was the ram, a bronze beak designed to punch through an enemy's hull at speed. Success depended on a perfect, last-minute turn to present the ram at the ideal angle. The captain would scream commands from the forward fighting platform, signals relayed by a piper or drummer marking the stroke for the oarsmen. Amidst the chaos of splintering wood and shouting men, the gubernator had to execute a flawlessly timed maneuver. A pull too early, and the enemy's ship would evade. A pull too late, and the two vessels would crash together, locking in a deadly embrace. His skill meant the difference between a victorious strike and a catastrophic collision. This intimate, physical connection between man and machine is what made the Roman rudder system so effective. It was an alliance of human intuition and mechanical advantage, a partnership that conquered the Mediterranean. Yet this very partnership contained the seeds of the technology's greatest vulnerability. The gubernator and his tiller were not just operators of the system. They were its living, breathing memory banks. When that living knowledge faded, the brilliant machine itself began to drift into obscurity. The helmsman's skill was undeniable, but his control relied on a hidden mechanical heart. The true sophistication of the Roman rudder hinges on a deceptively simple question. How was it actually attached to the ship? Today, we use a system of pins and rings. Metal pins called pintles on the rudder drop into matching rings, the gudgeons, welded to the stern. This creates a clean, strong pivot. But did the Romans, 2,000 years ago, use this same elegant hardware? The answer is a fascinating technical puzzle, and it divides historians. Some argue that the Romans absolutely must have used a metal pintle and gudgeon system, especially for their largest ships. The logic is compelling. The immense forces on a rudder blade, particularly during a storm or a battle turn, would quickly tear apart a simple rope, lashing, or wear out a wooden socket. Bronze fittings, like those found on the Nemi ships, seem to point toward this advanced solution. The Nemi barges had those heavy bronze brackets, but were they true gudgeons designed to receive a pin, or were they something else? To solve this, we must look beyond the luxury of a lake and into the harsh reality of the open sea. The wrecks of actual ocean-going vessels provide more ambiguous clues. Take the Madrègue de Jean's wreck, a massive Roman freighter found off the coast of France. This ship, which sank around the 1st century, was a titan of trade. Its hull was built for carrying heavy cargo across the Mediterranean. Archaeologists studying its stern structure found evidence of a very sturdy, central rudder mounting. However, the precise metal fittings did not survive the centuries of corrosion on the seabed. What remained were the patterns of wear and the design of the sternpost itself, suggesting a heavily reinforced pivot point, but not conclusively proving the pintle and gudgeon method. Another wreck at Port-Vendres offers a different possibility. Analysis of the sternpost on this vessel indicated the use of a large, carved wooden socket. Imagine the thick, vertical sternpost having a rounded hollow carved into its trailing edge. The rudder stock would then have a corresponding rounded tenon, or knob, at its forward edge. This knob would fit into that socket, creating a wooden ball and socket joint. To secure it, heavy ropes would be lashed around the stock and through holes in the hull, holding the rudder firmly in place while still allowing it to swing. This is a more ancient, but remarkably effective, solution. It uses the natural strength of shaped timber and the tension of woven fiber instead of forged metal. So which was it? The truth is, it was probably both. The Roman Empire lasted for centuries and spanned countless cultures and shipyards. A standardized, one-size-fits-all approach is a modern concept. A shipwright in Alexandria, with access to skilled bronze casters, might have built a rudder with metal fittings for a wealthy merchant. A builder in a provincial port in Gaul, working with local materials and traditions, might have perfected the wooden socket and lashing technique. Both systems solved the core problem, creating a durable pivot that could translate the helmsman's will into the ship's turn. This variation itself is a clue to the technology's fate. A system that depends on specialized metal casting or a very specific, master-level woodworking technique is fragile knowledge. It can disappear if the chain of apprenticeship breaks. But a system that can be lashed together with rope and a carved socket, that is our idea with deeper roots, one that might just survive a dark age. The attachment method is more than a technical detail. It is a signature of the civilization that built it. And when that signature began to fade, the rudder's story entered its strangest chapter, not of improvement, but of forgetting. This adaptability meant there was no single Roman rudder. The blade's shape was a direct answer to the ship's purpose, a conversation between wood and water. Think of the colossal grain freighters, the floating barns of the ancient world. These ships, like the one found at Madrig de Dunes, were built for one thing: moving mountains of Egyptian wheat to feed the city of Rome. Their design prioritized capacity and stability over speed. They had wide, rounded hulls, a deep draft sitting low in the water, and a single massive square sail. For such a vessel, the rudder was not a tool for sharp turns. It was a tool for maintaining a straight, unwavering course across hundreds of miles of open sea. Its design reflected this. The rudder on a grain freighter would be broad and deep, a vast wooden fin that reached far down below the hull. This gave it tremendous leverage in the water, acting like a powerful keel to fight against crosswinds and currents, trying to push the bulky ship off course. It was a rudder built for endurance, not excitement. Its movements were slow and deliberate, a steady hand guiding a floating fortress. Now picture its polar opposite, the Liburnian. This was the sleek patrol craft of the Roman Navy, a descendant of fast pirate ships. It was long, narrow, and shallow, powered by banks of oarsmen for bursts of incredible speed. Its sail was secondary. This ship lived and died by agility. Its mission was to chase down pirates, scout coastlines, and execute the devastating ramming maneuver. For the Liburnian, a rudder modeled on the grain ship would be a death sentence. That deep, broad blade would create immense drag, slowing the ship terribly. More critically, it would be sluggish to turn. In a naval skirmish, a delay of a single heartbeat in a turn could mean missing the ramming strike or presenting your own flank to the enemy. So the Liburnian's rudder was a different instrument entirely. It was smaller, narrower, and often mounted higher on the stern. It bit into the water with less surface area, creating far less drag when sailing straight. But when the gubernator hauled on the tiller, that smaller blade could pivot with lightning speed. The ship would respond almost immediately, carving a tight, sharp turn. This was a rudder built for reflexes, for the split-second decisions of battle. It translated the helmsman's urgent command into instant directional change. This contrast reveals the true sophistication of Roman maritime thinking. They did not simply invent a better steering device and slap it on every hull. They understood that the rudder was an integral part of a larger system. The beam of the ship, its draft, its sail plan, all of these factors dictated the rudder's perfect form. A shipwright designing a grain carrier would calculate the necessary stability and choose a rudder shape to provide it. A naval architect crafting a Liburnian would prioritize response time and design accordingly. This was engineering tailored to function, a clear sign of a mature and pragmatic technological culture. They had moved beyond copying a single solution to mastering a principle. And that mastery would soon face its ultimate test, not on the calm Mediterranean, but in the treacherous waters of the open Atlantic. That deep, broad rudder found its perfect match in the humble corbetta. This was the true workhorse of the Roman economy, the vessel that turned the Mediterranean into a conveyor belt for the empire's lifeblood. Forget the sleek warships. The corbetta was all about volume. Its hull was a masterpiece of rounded geometry, a shape shipwrights called full. Imagine a giant, floating wooden barrel, gently curved from bow to stern, sitting low and heavy in the water. This design sacrificed every ounce of speed for one thing: cargo space. A single corbetta could carry hundreds of tons of grain from Egypt, thousands of amphorae of olive oil from Spain, or precious marble slabs from Greece. It was a floating warehouse, and its stability was its greatest asset. But this very design created a unique steering challenge. A blunt, rounded stern does not slice cleanly through the water, it pushes against it. Maneuvering such a sluggish, heavy mass with a standard rudder would have been a nightmare, requiring a team of exhausted helmsmen. The solution was a clever piece of physics called a balanced rudder. On most rudders, the entire blade is located behind the pivot point, the spot where it attaches to the ship. To turn it, you have to push the entire surface area against the water's resistance. It is like trying to swing a heavy door by pushing right next to the hinges. The balanced rudder changed the equation. A portion of the blade, often a significant third of its width, was positioned forward of the pivot point. This meant that when the helmsman turned the tiller, water pressure acted on both sides of the pivot. The force on the forward part actually helped to initiate the turn, counteracting some of the resistance from the rear section. It was a self-assisting mechanism. For the Corbett's pilot, this innovation translated directly into reduced physical strain. He could guide his cumbersome charge with more precision and far less brute force, making minute adjustments to keep on course during the long and monotonous voyages that fueled Rome. This was not a rudder designed for glory in battle, but for relentless, profitable efficiency. Its evolution was driven purely by economic necessity. The empire's insatiable appetite for goods demanded ships that could carry more, and those ships demanded smarter steering. The balanced rudder on the Corbett's rounded stern is a quiet testament to a simple truth. The engine of imperial power was not just the legionary's sword, but the merchant's scale and the shipwright's quiet genius. That relentless push for efficiency in the merchant fleet had a violent, parallel evolution in the navy. The rudder's journey from a steering tool to a decisive weapon began with the thunderous clashes of the Punic Wars. In those early, desperate sea battles, Rome's weapon was the quinquereme, a towering fortress of wood and oars. Its primary tactic was the straightforward, brutal ram. Steering such a behemoth was a monumental task. Its twin quarter rudders, operated by multiple men, were designed for one overwhelming purpose: to build up a crushing forward momentum, and then hold a deadly straight line for the final impact. Precision turning was secondary to raw, forward power. The battle was won or lost in the initial charge, but naval warfare does not stand still. As Rome secured the Mediterranean, its enemies changed from rival empires to scattered, elusive pirates and raiders. The lumbering quinquereme was like using a sledgehammer to swat a fly, too slow, too expensive, and too vulnerable in the open water. The empire's response was to adopt and perfect a lighter, far more agile vessel, the Liburnian. This shift in hardware triggered a revolution in both tactics and steering. The Liburnian's entire reason for being was maneuverability. Its slim hull, powered by two efficient banks of oars, could accelerate and change direction with a speed the old warships could never match. This new agility gave birth to a more sophisticated and deadly battle maneuver, the deepens, or the breaking through tactic. It was no longer just about a single, head-on ram. A skilled captain would now drive his Liburnian at high speed through the enemy's line of ships, not to ram directly, but to slice past them. As his ship flashed by an enemy vessel, his starboard bank of oarsmen would lift their oars at the last possible second to avoid shearing them off, while the marines on deck unleashed a storm of arrows, javelins, and pots of Greek fire. The goal was to cripple the enemy's oarsmen and deck crew in a single, devastating pass. Then, having broken through the line, the Liburnian would execute a breathtakingly fast turn to come around and strike the wounded enemy from the rear or the flank. This is where the rudder transformed from a simple directional aid into the key to offensive survival. That fast, responsive, narrow-bladed rudder we described earlier was the linchpin of the entire deepens. The initial breakthrough required a steady, unwavering course at high speed, but the follow-up, the killing turn, demanded something extraordinary. The helmsman, having flown past the enemy, now had to spin his ship 180 degrees in the tightest possible arc, all while maintaining momentum. He would haul the tiller hard over, the smaller, high-mounted rudder would bite into the water with minimal drag, pivoting the Liburnian's stern around with whiplash speed. The oarsmen on one side would backwater, while the others pulled forward, adding their muscle to the turn. Within moments, the ship would have completely reversed its direction, now lining up for the fatal strike on a confused and damaged opponent. In this dance of death, the rudder was no longer just for keeping course. It was the instrument that positioned the ram. A half-second delay in its response, a slight sluggishness in the turn, and the opportunity vanished. The enemy could escape, or worse, another enemy ship could take you in the flank. The Liburnian's rudder, therefore, was not an accessory. It was the central nervous system of a new kind of naval predator. Its evolution was driven by the unforgiving calculus of combat, where sharper turns meant more kills and fewer losses. This refinement for war would, in a great historical irony, become one of the technology's most enduring legacies, long after the last Liburnian patrol faded from memory. The Liburnian's agile rudder was a masterpiece for the sheltered Mediterranean. But Rome's ambitions soon sailed beyond that familiar sea. To reach the tin mines of Britain or the trading posts of West Africa, their ships had to pass the Pillars of Hercules and enter the vast, rolling wilderness of the Atlantic Ocean. Here, the rules of sailing changed completely. The Mediterranean is a tideless sea, with relatively predictable winds and currents confined by land. The Atlantic, by contrast, is a raw, open force. Roman mariners encountered relentless ocean swells, powerful tidal currents that could sweep a ship miles off course, and winds that howled with an unfamiliar ferocity. For the ship's rudder, this was the ultimate stress test. The constant, pounding pressure of deep water waves could shake a steering assembly to splinters. A rudder built for the quick, sharp turns of coastal combat was now tasked with a grueling marathon of stability, fighting for days on end just to keep the bow pointed north toward Britain. This new environment demanded not just skill from the gubernator, but a fundamental rethinking of the rudder's construction. The elegant, narrow blades of the Liburnian would be dangerously overwhelmed. For these ocean voyages, shipwrights returned to the principles of the grain freighter, but pushed them further. They built rudders that were not just broad, but massively reinforced. The stock, the vertical spine, would be hewn from the thickest, most resilient oak available, sometimes using a naturally curved timber that followed the grain for extra strength. The blade itself was often built up from multiple layers of wood, laminated together with waterproof glue and secured with a forest of iron nails, creating a composite structure far tougher than a single plank. The pivot point, whether a bronze gudgeon or a carved wooden socket, was enlarged and braced with extra timber. This was a rudder built for survival, not speed, its entire philosophy shifting from finesse to brute force endurance. Yet even these robust designs might not represent the extreme of Roman adaptation. Ancient sources describe a strange vessel used in the Atlantic approaches, the carabus. Writers like Pliny mention it as a boat used by the peoples of Britain and Gaul, and later adopted by Romans for specific tasks. Its most baffling feature was a hull made of leather stretched over a wooden frame. This sounds utterly alien to Mediterranean shipbuilding, but it makes a certain brutal sense for the Atlantic. A leather hull is flexible. It can give and flex with the waves instead of fighting them, much like a modern inflatable boat. This raises a fascinating question about steering. If the hull itself was a pliable skin, how on earth did they mount a rigid, heavy oak rudder to it? A standard centerline rudder, pounding against its mounting with every wave, would likely tear straight through the leather. The carabus might have used a completely different system, perhaps a very large steering oar lashed to the side of the frame. a technology that harkened back to a much older, more forgiving method. Or perhaps they used a pair of smaller steering paddles, distributing the stress across a wider area of the flexible hull. The Caribus remains a shadow in the historical record, but its very possibility highlights a critical truth. When Roman technology met the raw power of the ocean, it did not always conquer. Sometimes it had to compromise, to borrow, or to reinvent. The journey beyond the Pillars of Hercules was a journey to the very edge of their maritime understanding, where the rules of the inland sea no longer applied. The Atlantic's raw power forced Roman engineers to adapt, but to see their everyday maritime world, we must look not to the ocean depths, but to the floors of wealthy villas and the walls of grand monuments. The silent witnesses to this age are not shipwrecks, but art. Mosaics and stone reliefs offer a vibrant, if puzzling, gallery of Roman seafaring. They are our windows into a world in motion, but like all windows, the view can be distorted. One of the most breathtaking examples is the Al-Thiberus mosaic, discovered in Tunisia. This intricate floor is essentially a catalogue of Roman ship types, each labelled with its name. It is a maritime encyclopedia in coloured stone. Among the detailed hulls and rigging, we can search for clues about steering. The artists took great care to show rigging lines and sail shapes, but when it comes to the stern, the depictions become more stylized. We often see the suggestion of steering oars, but they are simplified into symbolic forms, a few lines indicating their presence, rather than a blueprint of their construction. The rudders are usually shown near the stern, but the precise, technical mounting is rarely the artist's focus. Their goal was to convey the idea of a ship, its identity and purpose, not to provide an engineering schematic for future historians. This is the central challenge and the great value of iconographic evidence. A tomb relief from Pompeii might show a merchant vessel with 2/4 rudders clearly painted on the sides, a representation of the older, twin system. Yet we know from shipwrecks that by that same period, the centerline rudder was in use. So is the artist depicting an outdated ship, or simply using a familiar artistic shorthand that audiences would instantly recognize. The art is a language, and its grammar includes symbolism, tradition, and the limitations of the medium. A stone carver cannot easily depict the complex, three-dimensional pivot of a centerline rudder stock passing through the hull. It is far easier to show two clean, symmetrical blades on the sides. This does not mean the centerline rudder did not exist. It means that artistic convention sometimes lagged behind technological reality. Yet within these limitations, certain details ring true. Look closely at some of the more carefully rendered pieces. In a few mosaics, you can see a single helmsman standing at the stern, his hands gripping a long horizontal bar. That is the tiller. Its presence tells us that the steering mechanism had a proper pivot point, a fulcrum for leverage. The fact that only one man is shown, not a team, strongly suggests the improved mechanical advantage of the central rudder system. These are the subtle truths we can glean. The art may not show us the exact bronze fitting, but it shows us the human experience. It shows us the gubernator in his stance, the relationship between the man and the machine. It confirms that the steering apparatus was a recognizable, integral part of the ship's silhouette. So we must read this visual record like a seasoned sailor reads the sea, looking past the surface impression for the deeper currents of truth. These mosaics and reliefs are not photographs, but they are echoes. They tell us what was important enough to be remembered, celebrated, and set in stone. And what they shout across the centuries is that the ship and the hand that guided it were fundamental to Roman identity. This artistic testimony, however, leads us to a haunting contradiction. If this technology was so widespread, so culturally embedded that it was immortalized in art across the empire. Why does its physical trail seem to grow so faint after Rome's fall? The answer may lie not in the grand depictions, but in the quiet, practical life of the technology itself, and a vulnerability no artist thought to capture. The silent testimony of art finds its hard evidence in the mud and sand of the seabed. For the true forensic history of the Roman rudder, we must become underwater detectives, examining the bones of ships that never made it home. Two wrecks in particular, separated by the width of the Mediterranean, offer us a stark and tangible contrast. Off the southern coast of France, near the modern town of Hyères, lies the wreck of Madrig de Jeans. This was not a small vessel. It was a titan of commerce, a grain freighter from the 1st century that stretched over 130 feet long. When it sank, it was carrying a staggering load of wine amphorae, thousands of them. Its immense rounded hull was the epitome of the cargo ship design, built for volume over speed. Archaeologists studying its remains made a crucial discovery at the stern. The structure of the hull timbers showed clear evidence for a single, massive centerline rudder. The sternpost itself was massively reinforced with extra timber, a built-in strength to handle the enormous stresses from a rudder blade large enough to steer such a behemoth. While the wood of the rudder itself had mostly vanished, the shape of its housing and the pattern of wear told a clear story. This was a rudder built for endurance, a deep, broad blade designed to keep that heavy, wallowing ship on a steady course across open water. The fastenings, however, remained a mystery, likely consumed by centuries of corrosion. To find more intimate details, we travel west, to the harbor of Port-Vendres. Here, another 1st century wreck, known simply as Port-Vendres B, revealed a more personal snapshot. This ship was smaller, perhaps a coastal trader. Its preservation was different, offering a ghostly impression of the stern structure. Most importantly, archaeologists found the actual remains of a rudder attachment system. The evidence pointed not to complex bronze castings, but to a robust and practical solution. The trailing edge of the ship's sternpost had a carefully carved, rounded socket. The rudder stock would have had a matching rounded tenon that fit into this socket, creating a strong wooden pivot. To secure it, heavy ropes would have been lashed through holes in the hull and around the rudder stock, holding it firmly in place while allowing it to swing. This was technology built from local materials and masterful woodworking, a system that required no specialized metal foundry. These two wrecks, the colossal freighter and the humble coaster, speak to the adaptable reality of Roman engineering. Madrig de Jeans shows the scale and ambition, a rudder system integral to a ship that was a floating engine of empire. Port-Vendres B shows the everyday craftsmanship, the elegant rope-lashed joint that could be repaired in any port with simple tools. Together they form a forensic portrait. The size and shape of the rudder were dictated by the ship's life, its purpose written in the geometry of its hull. The fastenings were a choice, a balance between available resources and the relentless demands of the sea. These silent wrecks are more than ruins, they are crime scenes from a maritime world, and the rudder is always a key piece of evidence, telling us not just how the ship was steered, but how it was conceived, built, and ultimately, how it met its end. This tangible proof from the deep makes the next chapter of the story all the more perplexing. For after such clear and sophisticated development, the trail seems to go cold. But the physical evidence from wrecks is only half the story. To hear the voices of the Romans themselves, we must turn to their literature, to the scrolls and letters where they wrote about their world. This is a different kind of archaeology, sifting through words instead of sediment, searching for casual mentions and technical terms that reveal what they considered common knowledge. The Latin language itself holds our first clue. The word for the steering apparatus was gubernaculum. It is a wonderfully broad term, encompassing the entire system, the rudder, the tiller, the whole mechanism of control. From it we get our word governor and also gubernatorial, a perfect metaphor for leadership. But when a Roman wanted to be more specific, he might refer to the clavis, which most often meant the tiller, the wooden bar his hands actually gripped. This distinction in their vocabulary shows they thought about steering as an integrated machine with distinct parts. We see these terms come alive in practical accounts. Julius Caesar, in his Gallic Wars, writes about the challenges of the English Channel. He describes how his ships, built for the Mediterranean, struggled against the fierce Atlantic tides and strange, shallow draft British vessels. While he does not give us a detailed blueprint of a rudder, his strategic concerns are revealing. He notes the importance of ship handling, of being able to turn quickly to face a new enemy direction, or to escape a treacherous shore. His very anxiety implies a reliance on a responsive steering system, one that could be a tactical advantage or a fatal liability. For more technical glimpses, we turn to Pliny the Elder, that voracious collector of knowledge. In his Natural History, a sprawling encyclopedia of the ancient world, he discusses different types of wood. He notes that certain trees are best for shipbuilding, and others, like the beech, are specifically good for making gubernacula. This offhand comment is a treasure. It tells us that rudder construction was specialized enough to require specific timber, a detail any shipwright would know. Pliny is not describing a mystery. He is referencing a well-understood piece of technology, as mundane and essential as the wheel to a cart. Perhaps the most telling clues come not from technical manuals, but from poetry and everyday speech. The great poet Virgil, in his epic The Aeneid, constantly uses sailing as a metaphor for fate and leadership. He writes of Aeneas holding the course or turning the stern, phrases that would resonate deeply with an audience familiar with the sea. When Cicero writes letters, he uses steering metaphors to discuss political strategy. To seize the helm or to let go of the tiller were idioms as clear to a Roman as driving the car is to us. This is the key. The rudder and its tiller were embedded in the very fabric of their thought, a go-to analogy for control and direction. This widespread, casual use in literature suggests the centerline rudder was not an experimental secret, but a commonplace piece of equipment, so normal it lived in the background of their metaphors. The literary record, therefore, does not shout about the rudder's mechanics. It whispers about its presence. It fills the gaps between the shipwrecks and the mosaics with the hum of daily life. It confirms that the gubernaculum was not just a tool, but a concept, a symbol of human will imposed upon the chaotic sea. Yet this very normalcy makes its subsequent disappearance from the historical record so profoundly strange. If it was this ordinary, this ingrained, how could such a useful idea ever be forgotten? The answer may lie not in the technology's failure, but in the slow collapse of the world that sustained it. That deep integration into Roman life makes its later disappearance so baffling. But to solve that mystery, we must look even further back, to an even more provocative question. Where did the idea for the centerline rudder actually come from? The Romans were brilliant adapters, but were they also original inventors? This leads us to a historical puzzle that stretches far beyond the Mediterranean, all the way to the spice-scented ports of the Indian Ocean and the vast river networks of China. We know for a fact that Roman merchant ships, those very same rounded corbiters, made the long, dangerous voyage to India. They sailed with the monsoon winds, carrying gold and glass to trade for pepper, gems, and silk. In ports like Musaris on the coast of Kerala, Roman sailors would have mingled with merchants from Arabia, East Africa, and Southeast Asia. They would have seen ships of radically different designs, with sails woven from coconut fiber and hulls built with techniques unknown in the West. And crucially, they might have seen a different way to steer. For centuries, perhaps even millennia, sailors in the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea had been using a steering technology that was, in some ways, more advanced than the Mediterranean's quarter rudders. Vessels in these regions often used a single axial rudder, a blade mounted directly on the centerline of the stern, controlled by a tiller and, crucially, lowered and raised through a well in the hull. This was not a steering oar that pivoted at the water's surface. It was a true integrated rudder system. The Chinese, in particular, had been using sophisticated sternpost rudders since at least the Han Dynasty, centuries before the Nemi ships were built. They even used balanced rudders and the ingenious fenestrated rudder, which had holes in it to reduce effort, innovations the Romans seemingly never developed. So here is the tantalizing, hotly debated question. Did a Roman shipwright, sipping wine in an Indian port, see a Chinese junk or an Arab dhow with its elegant sternpost rudder and have a eureka, a moment? Did he sketch the idea on a piece of pottery and carry that revolutionary concept back to Austria? Or did the idea travel the other way? The evidence is frustratingly circumstantial. There are no surviving Roman texts that say, "We copied the rudder from the Eastern sailors." The archaeological record shows the Roman rudder evolving in its own distinct way, with its bronze brackets and rope lashings, different in detail from Eastern design. This suggests independent invention, a case of different cultures solving the same fundamental problem: how to control a large ship, and arriving at similar, brilliant solutions because the laws of physics are universal. Water, wood, and leverage work the same way in the Mediterranean as they do in the South China Sea. Yet the possibility of indirect inspiration is irresistible. The Silk Road was not just a land route. It was a network of maritime highways. Ideas are the lightest, most valuable cargo of all. A Roman merchant would not need to understand the full engineering blueprint of a Chinese rudder. He would only need to see it work, to grasp the principle of a single central pivot. That seed of an idea, carried back to a shipyard in Alexandria, could have fallen on fertile ground, already primed for innovation by the demands of empire. It might have accelerated a process already underway, giving Roman engineers a crucial nudge toward the solution they were already groping toward. This is the great, unresolved dialogue of history. Was it parallel genius, or a whispered secret passed between sailors on a crowded dock? The Roman rudder stands at the crossroads of that mystery, a piece of technology that may have had more than one birthplace. And if knowledge could flow into the empire along these sea roads, it raises a darker, more consequential question about the currents of history. Could that same vital knowledge also flow out and be lost when those roads fell silent? The bustling docks of India hint at a world of shared maritime ideas, but the fate of the Roman rudder was decided closer to home, in the empire's enduring eastern heart. When the Western Roman Empire fragmented, its great shipyards in Italy and Gaul fell silent. But in the east, centered on the glorious, walled city of Constantinople, the Roman Empire did not end. It transformed, becoming the Byzantine Empire, and it held the sea as its lifeline for another 1,000 years. Here, the story of the rudder did not stop. It entered a new, defensive chapter. The Byzantine navy's flagship was the dromon, a name that means runner. This was a swift, deadly warship, the direct descendant of the Roman Liburnian, but refined through centuries of relentless conflict. Its primary enemy was no longer a rival empire's fleet, but the agile, ferocious raiding galleys of Arab navies. This eternal struggle on the water created a pressure cooker for innovation. The dromon almost certainly used an evolved version of the centerline rudder. Contemporary descriptions and later illustrations suggest it employed a twin rudder system. But this was not a return to the clumsy side paddles of old. Instead, two rudders were mounted in parallel on the sternpost, one slightly behind the other. This was a redundancy born of brutal experience. In the heat of a naval melee, a single rudder could be shattered by a ram or sheared off by a collision. A second backup blade meant a dromon could stay in the fight, even after a crippling blow. The tiller system became more complex, likely linking both rudders to a single control for the helmsman. This was not stagnation, it was specialization for survival. Furthermore, the centuries of contact and conflict with Arab sailors undoubtedly led to a cross-pollination of ideas. Arab ships, which dominated the Indian Ocean trade, used advanced sternpost rudders and lateen sails. The Byzantines, pragmatic as their Roman forebears, would have observed and adapted any useful feature that improved their own ships' handling or speed. The rudder on a 10th century dromon was thus a hybrid artifact, a Roman core principle armored with Byzantine redundancy and subtly influenced by Eastern design. This continuous refinement in Constantinople served as a vital bridge. While Western Europe entered a period where large-scale naval engineering receded, the Byzantine Empire acted as a living library, safeguarding the accumulated nautical wisdom of antiquity. The gubernator still stood at his post, the tiller still bit into the water, and the knowledge of how to build and use that essential technology was preserved, not in scrolls, but in the daily practice of sailors and shipwrights, defending a civilization under siege. The rudder's journey was far from over. It was simply being guarded, ready for the day it would sail west once more. Constantinople kept the flame alive, but across the fractured map of post-Roman Europe, the story of steering took a strange and divergent turn. While the Byzantines refined the axial rudder for war, the seafarers of the north, the legendary Vikings, championed a completely different solution, one that seemed to harken back to a much older world. Their iconic longships were steered not by a centerline rudder, but by a massive steering oar mounted on the starboard side, the right side of the ship. This is the origin of the very word starboard itself, from the Old Norse styri, meaning to steer, and borð, meaning the side of the ship. This Viking-style side rudder was a brilliant piece of engineering for its specific purpose. It was mounted on a sturdy pivot, allowing it to be raised in shallow water or during a beach landing, a crucial feature for raiders who needed to strike anywhere along a coast. For navigating the narrow fjords, rivers, and coastal waters of northern Europe, it was perfectly adequate. Yet, compared to the Roman and Byzantine axial rudder, it was a technological cousin, not a descendant. It represented a parallel path, one that dominated the north for centuries, while the Mediterranean tradition followed its own, quieter course. This split creates our central puzzle. If the axial rudder was so superior, why did it not sweep north and replace the side rudder immediately? The answer lies in the ships themselves and the seas they sailed. The Viking longship was a shallow draft, flexible vessel built for speed and amphibious raids. Its stern was often too narrow and pointed to easily accommodate a large, central rudder post. The side rudder worked in harmony with this design. Meanwhile, in the warmer, deeper waters of the Mediterranean, ship design had never abandoned the rounded, full-hulled merchant vessel. That blunt stern was always there, a silent invitation for the axial rudder to return. And return it did. By the 12th and 13th centuries, medieval art from the Mediterranean tells a clear story. Illuminated manuscripts, church carvings, and port seals begin to show ships with unmistakable, centrally mounted sternpost rudders. A famous example is the Mappa Mundi in Hereford Cathedral, from around the 13th century, which depicts a Mediterranean cog with a clear central rudder. This was not a new invention, it was a re-emergence. The knowledge had never fully disappeared. It had simply retreated into a smaller geographical and cultural sphere, preserved in Byzantine shipyards, and perhaps in the lingering memory of Italian and Adriatic ports that never completely lost their Roman nautical heritage. The true sternpost rudder, as a defining feature of European shipping, emerges from this medieval blend when northern ship design began to change. As trade revived and ships grew larger and deeper for Atlantic voyages, the limitations of the side rudder became glaring. It was vulnerable in heavy ocean swells and provided less precise control for a bulky, tall-sided cog loaded with cargo. Sometime around the 13th century, in a moment of cross-cultural synthesis no one recorded, a shipwright somewhere looked at the sturdy, rounded stern of a northern cog and saw the same opportunity his Roman ancestors had seen a millennium earlier. He mounted a true axial rudder on the sternpost, using iron pintles and gudgeons, a stronger metal technology than the Romans had, for a more secure pivot. The transition was slow and patchwork, but the advantage was undeniable. This medieval re-adoption solves nothing, it deepens the mystery. It shows that technological history is not a straight, ascending line from primitive to advanced. It is a complex web where good ideas can be shelved, not because they are forgotten, but because the world around them changes. The Viking side rudder was not a regression. It was the perfect tool for its time and place. The Roman axial rudder was not lost. It was waiting for the right ship to come along again. Its journey from a Roman luxury barge to a medieval trading cog was not a story of rediscovery, but of reunion. A once dormant solution finding a new problem it was uniquely suited to solve. This messy, non-linear path forces us to ask a more profound question. What does it take for a society not just to invent a technology, but to truly, permanently embrace it? Theories about ancient steering are one thing, but feeling the tiller fight back in a storm is another. This is where experimental archaeology takes the helm, building full-scale replicas and sailing them into the very conditions the Romans faced. Projects like the Jupiter, a reconstructed Roman cargo ship, and the Victoria, a Greek trireme, have done exactly that, turning scholarly debate into tangible, physical experience. The goal is not to prove a single point, but to ask the ship itself the questions we cannot. What does a reconstructed rudder actually feel like? The crews of these replica vessels discovered that the mechanics on paper often clash with the reality of wind and water. On the Jupiter, modeled after a 1st century merchantman, the steering system was built based on the best evidence from wrecks, like Madrague de Jeans. The rudder was a single, massive oak blade mounted on the sternpost, controlled by a long tiller bar. In calm seas, the reports confirmed what historians suspected. A single helmsman could indeed manage the ship with surprising ease, the balanced design of the rudder doing much of the work. The real revelation came when the weather turned. Sailing in a moderate swell, the helmsman described a constant, muscular conversation with the sea. The tiller did not move smoothly. It transmitted every shock and shudder of the waves directly up the stock and into his arms and shoulders. Holding a steady course required not just strength, but an anticipatory skill, a need to feel the wave coming and adjust before it pushed the bow offline. This was the gubernator's true art, a physical literacy written in water pressure and wood grain. The force needed was substantial, but not superhuman. It was the sustained, exhausting force of a long wrestle, not a single Herculean heave. On the Victoria, the trireme replica, The lessons were about coordination and scale. The trireme used 2 large quarter rudders, each requiring a dedicated helmsman. Trials quickly showed that steering was a team sport. The 2 men had to work in perfect unison, pulling and pushing their tillers in a synchronized dance. A split-second miscommunication would send the ship into a useless, energy-wasting turn. The physical demand was immense, especially during the high-speed ramming maneuvers the ship was built for. As the oarsmen drove the vessel forward to ramming speed, the water pressure against the rudder blades became tremendous. The helmsmen had to brace with their entire body weight, their muscles burning, to execute the last-minute turn that would align the bronze ram. These replica trials provided brutal, invaluable data. They measured the pull force on the tiller, they timed turning circles. They logged the crew's fatigue. But beyond the numbers, they gave us something more profound, a visceral understanding of the human cost of ancient seamanship. They proved that the Roman and Greek systems worked, but they also highlighted their limits, the sheer physical endurance required, the vulnerability to fatigue, and the absolute reliance on skilled, experienced hands. A museum artifact is silent, but a replica ship speaks in creaks, groans, and the shouted commands of a crew fighting the elements. These floating experiments test our modern assumptions against the ancient reality of fatigue, weather, and human error. They remind us that technology is never just about wood and bronze. It is about the people who made it sing, and the immense effort that song required. The sheer physical struggle described by modern crews raises a fascinating question. With all their engineering genius, did the Romans ever try to automate the steering? To build some kind of ancient power steering to spare the helmsman's aching shoulders? It is a tantalizing idea, especially when we consider their most famous mechanical artifact. In a shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera, divers recovered a corroded bronze device of staggering complexity. A gear-driven computer that could predict planetary movements and eclipse cycles. This proves, beyond any doubt, that Roman-era craftsmen were capable of building intricate gearboxes and precision mechanisms. So if they could model the cosmos with gears, surely they could have rigged up a simple pulley system to help pull a tiller. The logical leap is tempting, but the archaeological record delivers a firm and silent verdict. Not a single shipwreck, not one piece of art, and no description in any text mentions or depicts a geared or pulley-assisted steering system on a Roman ship. The evidence we do have points overwhelmingly in the opposite direction, toward a philosophy of radical simplicity. The steering mechanism was, at its heart, just a very long lever. The tiller bar, sometimes over 10 feet long, was the key. By increasing the length of the lever, the helmsman gained a tremendous mechanical advantage. Think of it like using a crowbar. A short crowbar requires immense force to pry something loose, but a long crowbar makes the same job feel easy, because the length multiplies your effort. The tiller worked on exactly this principle. The helmsman's push at the end of that long wooden bar was translated into a powerful turning force at the rudder blade, with no gears required. This was not a lack of imagination. It was a profound understanding of reliability. The sea is the ultimate stress test environment. Salt water corrodes metal, constant motion shakes joints loose, and a sudden storm places unimaginable strain on every part of a ship. A system of pulleys or gears would have introduced multiple new points of failure, delicate parts that could jam, rust, or shatter under pressure. A simple oak tiller slotting into a solid oak stock, however, had almost nothing to go wrong. If it broke, which was rare, it could be lashed back together or replaced with a spare timber. The Roman maritime mind prioritized survival over convenience. A tired helmsman was a manageable problem. A snapped cable or a seized gear in a gale was a death sentence. The myth of ancient automation speaks to our modern desire to see the past as a mirror of our own technological aspirations. We look for engines where there were only levers, for computers where there were only abacuses. But the true sophistication of the Roman rudder lies in its elegant refusal of complexity. It achieved its goal, the precise command of a 1,000-ton vessel, using nothing more than wood, water, and human strength, amplified by a single, flawless application of physics. This commitment to robust simplicity would become the technology's greatest strength, and yet, in the end, also a hidden vulnerability. For when the specialized knowledge of how to select that perfect oak, how to carve that precise socket, and how to brace that pivotal joint began to fade, there was no simpler, cruder version to fall back on. The line between advanced simplicity and forgotten art is perilously thin. That elegant simplicity forged an empire. The evolution of the Roman rudder was not merely a technical footnote. It was a direct catalyst for the 2 centuries of stability and prosperity known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. This peace was not an absence of conflict, but a system of enforced order, and that system ran on ships. At its heart, the Pax Romana was a logistical miracle. The daily, uninterrupted movement of mountains of material across a sea, now called Mare Nostrum, our sea. And none of it would have been possible without the reliable, predictable control offered by the centerline rudder. Consider the lifeline of the empire, the annual grain shipment from Egypt. Every year, a vast fleet of heavy freighters, each steered by that single stout oak blade, made the dangerous crossing from Alexandria to Ostia. They carried enough wheat to feed the city of Rome's 1 million inhabitants for an entire year. Before the rudder's refinement, such a voyage was a gamble. A storm could scatter the fleet, sending ships hopelessly off course, their clumsy steering systems unable to fight the winds. With the improved rudder, a helmsman could hold a steady heading for days, battling crosswinds with a firm, manageable leverage. This predictability turned a perilous journey into a scheduled delivery. The grain arrived on time, the people were fed, and the city remained stable. The same principle applied to every trade route. Wine from Gaul, olive oil from Spain, marble from Greece, and silks from the East all flowed along these maritime highways. Merchants could calculate voyage times with greater accuracy, plan larger cargoes with confidence, and insure their goods at lower risk. The rudder, by making sea travel less of a lottery, dramatically lowered the cost of moving goods. It fueled an economic integration on a scale the ancient world had never seen, binding the provinces directly to the capital's appetite. This was the soft power of the rudder, the quiet engine of economic dominance. But the Pax Romana also rested on a harder edge, the absolute control of those same sea lanes. Piracy was the ancient world's great plague on commerce, a constant threat that could strangle trade and terrify coastal cities. The Roman Navy's mission was to eradicate it, and their primary tool was the agile Liburnian with its responsive, narrow-bladed rudder. To hunt pirates, you need ships that are faster and more maneuverable than their prey. The Liburnian's rudder gave Roman captains that critical edge. They could intercept swift raiding vessels, execute the sharp turns needed to board them, and patrol coastlines with relentless efficiency. The message was clear: the sea was a Roman space, governed by Roman law and enforced by Roman ships that could outturn and outfight any challenger. This military dominance projected power without the need for constant, large-scale battles. The mere presence of these capable warships, their helmsmen in full command, deterred rebellion and secured cooperation. The rudder thus served twin masters, commerce and the sword. It enabled the efficient transfer of wealth that made the empire rich, and it empowered the swift application of force that kept it secure. One allowed the empire to grow fat, the other ensured it grew strong. This synergy between economic logistics and military mobility is the hidden architecture of the Pax Romana. And it all pivoted, quite literally, on a well-carved piece of wood mounted at the stern of countless ships. The Roman peace was not built on treaties alone. It was built on timbers and steered by the steady hand of the gubernator. The Roman rudder was a masterpiece for its sea, but it was never alone in the world. To truly grasp its place in history, we must widen our view beyond the Mediterranean sun and set it alongside its brilliant contemporaries, the Viking side rudder and the Chinese balanced rudder. Each was a perfect answer to a different question posed by a different ocean. The Romans, as we have seen, perfected the axial rudder mounted directly on the sternpost of their rounded, cargo-heavy hulls. It was a solution for predictable leverage and steady courses across a relatively tideless sea. Now, sail north to the fjords of Scandinavia. Here, the Viking longship was a creature of shallow rivers, sudden raids, and beach landings. Its steering need was not for marathon stability, but for instant, shallow water agility. Their solution was the side rudder, or steerboard, mounted on the right flank of the ship. This massive oar could be pivoted up entirely when scraping onto a beach or navigating a rocky estuary. It worked in harmony with the longship's shallow, flexible hull. A brilliant adaptation to a landscape of coastlines, not open ocean. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Chinese engineers had been working on the same puzzle for even longer. By the Han Dynasty, centuries before the Nemi ships, they were using sternpost rudders suspended from the hull in a way that allowed them to be raised and lowered. But their crowning innovation was the balanced rudder. Remember the Roman Corbiter's version, where part of the blade sat forward of the pivot. The Chinese took this principle much further. They crafted rudders where a significant portion, sometimes nearly half of the blade, was positioned in front of the pivot point. This design dramatically reduced the effort needed to turn the rudder, a crucial advantage for controlling their massive, multi-masted ocean-going junks. Some Chinese rudders were even fenestrated, pierced with holes that reduced water resistance and made steering even smoother. So why such different paths? The answer is written in the geography and the culture of each civilization. The Mediterranean is a confined, island-dotted basin with predictable winds. Roman priorities were cargo volume and naval control, leading to ships that favored the axial rudder's steadying power. The Viking world was a fractured coastline of inlets and rivers, demanding ships built for speed and amphibious flexibility, hence the versatile side rudder. China, with its vast river networks and typhoon-prone southern seas, needed ships that were both enormous for trade and incredibly resilient, leading to the sophisticated, shock-absorbing balanced rudder. This global perspective is not about ranking one system as better. It is about seeing the Roman achievement for what it was, one extraordinarily successful branch on a worldwide tree of nautical innovation. Each culture looked at the water before it, considered the ships it needed to build, and engineered a steering solution that made the impossible routine. The Roman rudder did not have to be the only answer to be a brilliant one. Its true legacy lies in how elegantly it solved the specific problems of its own world, a testament to the universal human drive to master the sea, no matter the shore from which you begin. These three steering systems tell a story of adaptation, but they leave us with profound and unresolved puzzles. The Roman rudder, for all its apparent sophistication, is still shrouded in a fog of unanswered questions. The first and most technical mystery revolves around the exact pivot mechanism. Did the majority of ships rely on the heavy bronze gudgeons hinted at by the Nemi barges? a technology requiring advanced metal casting? Or was the more common solution the elegantly simple wooden socket and lashing, as suggested by wrecks like Port-Vendres? The archaeological record is frustratingly silent. The metals corroded to nothing, the ropes rotted away. We are left with impressions in wood and educated guesses. This is not a minor detail. It is the heart of the machine. Knowing which system was standard would tell us so much about the distribution of technical knowledge and the economic realities of imperial shipyards. Was this a unified imperial technology, or a collection of brilliant local adaptations? We simply do not know. This leads directly to the second great puzzle, the timeline. When was the transition from twin quarter rudders to a single axial rudder truly complete? The art shows both systems concurrently for centuries. The Nemi ships from the 1st century had a perfected central system, yet mosaics from the 3rd or 4th century still depict ships with side rudders. Does this mean the older technology persisted in some regions, or for certain ship types, long after the new one was invented? Or is it, as many suspect, merely the persistence of artistic convention, a shorthand that sculptors and mosaicists used because it was easier to carve and recognizable to viewers? The transition was likely a messy, centuries-long overlap, not a clean switch flipped in a single year. This messiness is the reality of technological change in the ancient world, a slow drift rather than a sudden revolution, which makes pinpointing it so difficult. Finally, we confront the most fundamental mystery of all. Why is the physical evidence so heartbreakingly sporadic? The answer lies in the cruel chemistry of the sea. Wood, rope, and leather are a feast for microorganisms. In most of the Mediterranean, a wooden shipwreck is consumed within decades, leaving only the non-perishable cargo, like amphorae or metal ingots, to mark its grave. The rudder, that complex assembly of wood and fiber, vanishes almost without a trace. This is why every intact discovery, like the Nemi barges in their freshwater lake, or the wrecks in the special conditions of the Black Sea, is a monumental event. The Black Sea, with its deep, anoxic waters devoid of oxygen, is a time capsule. There, wooden ships from antiquity sit on the seabed perfectly preserved, their masts still standing, their ropes still coiled, their rudders potentially still attached. Each new robotic dive into those dark waters holds the potential to rewrite our understanding. The next sonar ping could reveal a merchantman with its steering gear intact, finally showing us the exact configuration of the pivot, the precise lashings, the true shape of the blade. This is the thrilling, incomplete nature of the story. The history of technology, especially for perishable materials, is always a work in progress. What we think we know today is based on the fragments that have survived the relentless hunger of time and water. Our narrative of the Roman rudder is built on a handful of shipwrecks, a few mosaics, and the whispered hints in ancient texts. Every new discovery, whether from the black depths of the sea or a reinterpretation of a long-studied manuscript, can overturn a decades-old assumption. The rudder's journey is not a closed book. It is a manuscript with missing pages, waiting for the next storm or the next submersible to reveal a new chapter. The echoes of that ancient gubernator are still with us. Every time we hear the word governor, it is a direct linguistic inheritance from the Latin term for helmsman, a powerful metaphor that has steered its way from the wooden tiller to the halls of political power. This is not a coincidence. To govern a state, the Romans understood, was to steer a ship through treacherous waters, requiring a steady hand, foresight, and the ability to correct course against unpredictable forces. The legacy of their rudder, however, extends far beyond vocabulary and into the very physical reality of how we command the seas today. Look at any vessel, from a child's dinghy to a colossal container ship that stretches longer than 3 football fields. At its stern, you will find the same fundamental principle the Romans perfected: a vertical blade mounted on a central pivot. The materials have changed. We now use steel alloys and hydraulic rams instead of oak and human muscle. The scale is almost incomprehensibly larger, but the core geometry, the essential idea of a single fin attached to the ship's backbone and turned to deflect water flow, is identical. It is a solution so elegant, so mechanically sound, that it has never been improved upon in its basic form, only augmented. The Roman engineers, in solving their own immediate problem of controlling grain freighters and warships, inadvertently discovered a universal law of hydrodynamics. They found the optimal point of application for turning force. Their balanced rudder, with part of the blade forward of the pivot, is standard on nearly every large modern vessel because it reduces the immense power needed for steering. Even the complex, computer-controlled rudders on nuclear submarines or aircraft carriers operate on this 2,000-year-old blueprint. This permanence is the ultimate testament to their genius. It is one thing to build a magnificent aqueduct or a durable road, feats of static engineering. It is another to design a dynamic, interactive machine that interacts flawlessly with a chaotic, fluid environment like the sea. The Roman rudder was not just a tool. It was a perfect conversation with physics. Its design acknowledged the water's resistance and used it, leveraged it, to achieve a human goal. That conversation has continued uninterrupted across 2 millennia. Every captain who spins a ship's wheel, every autopilot system that makes a micro-adjustment on a transoceanic flight, is participating in a dialogue that Roman sailors began. Their innovation became the invisible standard, the default setting for maritime control. It faded from memory not because it failed, but because it succeeded so completely that it became the sea's only language. We no longer see it as a Roman invention. We see it simply as how a ship must be. And that is perhaps the most profound legacy of all, when a technology becomes so fundamental, so seamlessly woven into the fabric of our world, that we forget it ever had to be invented at all. From a humble steering oar to the sophisticated pivot at the stern, the evolution of the Roman ship rudder is a captivating tale of innovation driven by empire, trade, and war. It is a story written in waterlogged wood, faded mosaics, and ancient texts. As we have seen, this was not just about steering ships. It was about steering history itself. The rudder was the silent partner in Rome's grand ambitions, the uncelebrated tool that made the Mediterranean a Roman lake. It fed the city, funded its glory, and forged its peace. Yet its journey is a powerful reminder that progress is not a straight line. Brilliant ideas can be shelved, adapted, forgotten, and then reborn in a new age when the world is ready for them again. The Roman rudder whispers to us from the deep, a lesson in how civilizations are built not just on grand monuments, but on quiet, practical genius. So what other maritime mysteries are waiting to be uncovered? The sea still holds countless secrets in its silent wrecks. Let us know in the comments below what ancient puzzles you would like to explore next. And do not forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the secrets of the ancient world.